Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. My name is Omer. For whoever doesn't know me, I am one of the co-founders of IndieFlow, a platform for music management for independent musicians and managers. Feel free also to schedule a demo if you want to take a look a bit about who we are and what we do on the bottom. I'm very happy today to present dear friend and professional Andrew Kwan, who will be joining us. We will also be taking questions, so feel free to add a question in the also underneath your screen. You have an ask a question area. Also feel free to tell us a bit who you are in the poll, so we'll kind of maybe get an understanding of where to navigate the discussion. And yeah, welcome everybody to our first webinar that is building your PR strategy. And we're very, very excited to be hosting this. I'll introduce Andrew, and if you don't mind, I'm going to be reading this because Andrew has done so many amazing things throughout the past years that I don't want to miss anything. So introducing Andrew. Andrew Kwan is a music industry professional with above 4 years of experience in artist management development, marketing, publicity, and media. He currently works as a playlist and streaming optimization consultant at Universal Music Group. Previously, he worked as a content and partner analyst at Live Nation for 3.5 years. Through his artist management company, Romantic Music Group, he is leading the next generation of revolutionary artists, HOAX and the Millennial Club, which I personally also really like. His love for helping new artists get discovered also led him to build his own agency, Romantic PR, to help artists gain exposure, develop their brand, and build their digital presence. For me personally, it's also always fun to be speaking with Andrew. I can just listen to him for hours. And I'm going to invite him on the screen in a few seconds. So say hello to Andrew Kwan. Andrew's connecting. Couple seconds. There might be a connection problem over there on Andrew's side. Let's give it another few seconds. In the meantime, you can feel free to tell us a little bit who you are. Thank you. I see we have beginning musician, emerging artists, quite a few. We have a few managers also. That's awesome. We're going to try again, Andrew. One second, guys. Sorry, bear with us. Okay. Guys, 1 second. We have a technical problem. Not connecting. Okay, so Andrew's not able to connect. I'm going to try again. Bear with us a few minutes, and we'll get this show on the road. Really exciting stuff are coming ahead, so it's really recommended to stick around. Let's try again.
There we go.
There we go. I thought you ran away.
Yeah, exactly. No, I
Cool.
want this opportunity. Really, really grateful to be here and really excited to talk about PR and a lot of different marketing strategies for different artists out there, and any aspiring publicists or managers and other music industry professionals.
For sure. It's also exciting for us too. How are things over there, by the way, in the West Coast?
It's going all right. I imagine not too different from the rest of the world over here in terms of just real life stuff. Everyone in LA at least is ordered to stay at home at least through July. I don't imagine it letting up, for a good while. But yeah, I mean, I'm hanging in there okay. How about you? How's everything over there in Tel Aviv?
Everything's getting back to normal. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. It's getting a bit too quick. A lot of musicians though started booking gigs I've seen recently and kind of posting on it on Facebook. I wonder if it's really going to happen. But yeah, I think there's a lot of DIY stuff that are happening now. A lot of people improvising shows and gigs. At least that's what we see here. Just getting together, playing randomly, whether it's a house, a garden, or whatever. I even saw one at a bar, which for some reason is open today. So yeah, I think they're trying to get music back out there.
Interesting. Real interesting to see how that goes. I have my opinions about that, but we can save that for another time.
A different webinar for sure. Really. Cool, Andrew. So I think we'll jump in with the first question. I think maybe the beginning of everything, what would be the first stages of kind of building a brand for an artist, and what are the practicalities and tactics that you would recommend to use in market research and defining an audience?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that you asked that, because I feel, a lot of artists when they first start out, there are so many things you can do as an artist, right? Especially as an independent artist, if you don't have a manager or publicist or anything like that, you're managing everything yourself. So you're working on the music first and foremost. It takes a lot of creative energy and a lot of time physically to record your vocals, do the mixing, get the mastering done, doing a lot of different edits. From there, having to figure out distribution, how do you market your music? How do you, get your music out there? How do you get it on publications? And then you have to worry about social media. Now there's TikTok and there's just so many things, right? And I think something that artists—
And you always want it tomorrow as well.
I'm sorry?
You always want it tomorrow as well. You want it exactly. Happen now.
Right. It's and that's every artist. And of course, I understand. I would love to have the next single to be out literally right now. And that's just, I think artists definitely need to have a little more patience. I mean, there's definitely timelines and procedures and processes for everything that you have to do, right? I mean, just distribution alone, I think most distributors like DistroKid, TuneCore, or the AWOLs of the world and whatnot, they highly, highly recommend giving your music at least 4 weeks minimum lead time before the release date. So let's say, today is May 17th. If you want to get a song out there, you want to distribute it and have it released at least 4 weeks from today. And, something that I've seen happen for a lot of artists is you set it for 5 days from today, and then you check 5 days on Spotify later, it's not there. And the reason for that is because distributors need time to deliver your music to all the different music streaming services and the music stores. There's a lot to say about having patience in the music industry, and being a musician, it's definitely a long game, right? It's something that you're personally investing in the long run. And so, all that being said, you initially asked me what are kind of the beginning stages, what should you do as an artist, and kind of how do you conduct your market research and whatnot. And I think, one thing that artists tend to forget is really identifying themselves as an artist, right? Who are you as an artist? What do you stand for? Because nowadays, being an artist means more than just being a musician. You're not just performing music, you're not just writing and recording music and putting it out there. You really have to sell yourself as a brand. I mean, social media goes hand in hand with your music nowadays, and a lot of artists tend to think you can make music, put it out there, and people will just go flock to it without you promoting or anything, right? It's just like Instagram. Maybe you have a super cool picture or super cool video that you took over the weekend and you want to post it, and let's say you have like 200 followers, you post it and you're like, hell yeah, now 1,000 people are gonna look at it. That's just not how it works. Of course, it's amazing that technology has created a space and different platforms for you to get exposure and put your content out there, but you can't expect people to just see it. You have to, put in the work to do the marketing, do the PR, do all the social media stuff to really get it out there. And so identifying yourself and your brand is first and foremost the most important, because if you don't understand who you are, how do you expect other people to? And again, going back to how just being artist is more than just being a musician nowadays, you have to know your brand in order to know your audience. Because if you make indie rock music, and you're marketing to like a country audience, that's not going to resonate with the audience. It's just not what they're looking for. So immediately they're going to be turned off. And I guess similarly, if you're getting, if we're talking about Spotify playlist tactics, if you're, trying to get exposure on Spotify and you're, reaching out to a lot of different playlists to get your music added, but you're pitching an indie rock track to a hot country 2020 playlist, chances are you're not going to get added to that playlist. So yeah, understanding, your own brand identity as an artist is really important.
I guess it's kind of easy to define it by genre, right? Like, it's not a problem to define what type of music I do, whether it's country or bluegrass or indie rock or whatever. But a lot of talk behind the branding is about your story, right? It's like, from a marketing point, it's how to define that audience, how to do the research. And like, I think from what you said now, mostly like the genre part is like the first easy step. But then it becomes difficult when you need to kind of set an artistic vibe to even for your photos, or for how like your style, for how you speak or post on social media, and what kind of videos you do. So how would that be kind of like, what would be the first initial things I would do, like rather than more than just defining my genre? Like, how would I define my whole story? How does that happen?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And again, that's something that I feel artists aren't thinking about a lot. And I personally have found that's where PR comes in very handy. I mean, first and foremost, PR stands literally for public relations. So that's, in translation, that's crafting your narrative as an artist and your public perception of who you are, right? And so just like you said, everything that you publish and put out there, from content, from your press photos to your biography, to even whether your photo is black and white, or if it's, a certain color scheme, or things like that, all those things matter, because, certain audiences will gravitate towards a certain type of look, right? So say like, like an audience in America is going to be very different from an audience in Asia. The culture is just very different. And, people in Asia might, have an affinity for a certain thing, whereas Americans don't, and vice versa. And, all that being said, I think it is really important to kind of do your market research by looking into other artists who are similar to you, right? Like, let's say you're like a hip hop artist, and you have, even amongst hip hop, it's not just like one type of rap music. Like there's, as they call it, SoundCloud rap, or there's also, a lot of like more old school hip hop and whatnot. And, obviously every artist has their own unique brand and just aesthetic, even from a social media standpoint. So doing your research of looking at all the artists that you feel are in your lane or in your circle, seeing how they're posting on social media, but also seeing what other kinds of cool things they're doing is really going to be important for you to apply to yourself. And then more importantly, I think, just with anything as an artist, it's really important to not only let your story be told and be known, but craft it in a narrative that is unique to you, so that, Spotify has posted the stat plenty of times, but nowadays, I think there's something like 40,000 songs being released a day. In a month, that's 280,000 songs. In a year, that's like some few million. And all that being said, you have to really stand out nowadays, right? Like if your bio sounds just like everybody else's, how do you stand out? How do you, prove to someone that you're unique? So having a
I
really
also think
strong.
there's like a. Sorry, go on.
And I was just saying, I think having like a really strong bio where you're setting yourself apart and telling your story that is unique to you. You don't need to go and tell some crazy story just so you stand out, but just something that's unique to yourself.
Cool. Okay, we have here a question. Andrew, can you help with an example of how you helped in defining artist stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really good case study for one of my PR clients would be an alternative rock band called Dusk. They're based in Los Angeles. For their very first release last year, they released a single. It's actually a cover of the video game song. The video game was Kingdom Hearts. The song was Sanctuary. And, the whole entire band are really influenced by the video game community, and their very first single was a cover. So, they want to stand out from a lot of the other different alternative rock bands, hard rock bands, to show that they have other sides of them. Again, they're big video gamers, and they're like into like Final Fantasy and things like that. So they really wanted to make it known to the world that, we're an all rock band and we're into like, the grungy stuff and hard rock stuff, but we're also kind of a little bit of nerds, right? Like we tend to play a lot of video games and whatnot. So with their first release, Sanctuary, we made it a goal to not tap into only alternative rock audiences and go after publications and playlists that, revolve around that sound, but we tapped into the video game community as well. We went after, a lot of fan pages on Facebook, that were dedicated to Kingdom Hearts, and we found a lot of different Spotify playlists, and you'd be surprised how many there were. There were quite a few where the playlist theme was specifically video game covers, but metal covers of video game songs. And so that was definitely a really, really cool campaign to work on, just because it's very different and it really made them stand out. And, I think today, on Spotify, they're at just about 200,000 streams for that single. And,
Wow.
I think having done that and going after a lot of different playlists that were really relevant to exactly what the song was, it helped the algorithms on Spotify index, what type of music they made, and really help them boost their algorithmic streams and activity. But that being said, I think in terms of crafting stories in general, a lot of it has to do with finding relevant audiences, and again, just not just doing the spray and blast and just like send your pitch to every single blog, every single playlist, just because it's not going to work if it doesn't resonate with the audience.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize this first question section, basically what you're saying is to find your genre, check out other bands that are doing the same, kind of try and take some things that feel right for you, because also you can't like mock completely. It has to have some relation to you, so it becomes genuine, right? And then like in the example of this band, the Dusk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like find where a relevant audience can be. So if you're talking death metal or hip hop, then like, is hip hop in any computer games? Is hip hop in any Netflix, I don't know, originals and so on, and kind of craft from there the playlist and the different channels.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say, again, going back to, identifying yourself as a brand and having that understanding, and maybe even, it sounds redundant or it sounds stupid, but having a one sheet of like, writing down everything you stand for as an artist, and, from there creating different audience segments, so what types of audiences would resonate with your music and going after it and marketing around that.
Are there is there like a playbook or a form like to answer questions to kind of help you understand who you are as an artist?
I'm sure there are a lot of different, marketing tools or sheets out there, but I think there are definitely quite a few different factors. One thing we talked about was genre. Obviously, that's one of the easiest ones. I think you know, something people tend to forget is, you know, your life story and your origins and like where you come from. Because, you know, let's say you're someone from New York or LA, you're gonna have a lot of pride as to where you're from. And then speaking even beyond that, I know IndieFlow has a big international audience. You know, say you're like from Australia, like, you know, growing up in Australia is gonna be very different from growing up in America. And there are a lot of different cultural differences that, you know, that you're gonna be dialed into that others aren't. And again, I mean, Australia is obviously a much smaller country than the US, and, you know, there's a lot of room for Australians to show their unique backstory and narrative, you know, as opposed to a lot of different Americans who you might be kind of used to the story of, and just, you know, different lifestyles growing up. And I would say, you know, and everything from your upbringing and your life is going to be pertinent, right? Maybe like, you know, when you're 15, you had a very, unfortunately, if you had like a very tragic story, that's going to tie into a lot of, you know, a lot of your story and why you might have made certain decisions. And especially as a musician, you know, maybe you were motivated or influenced to go make music or a particular song because of a certain thing, whether it's a heartbreak, whether it's, you know, unfortunately a passing of a family member or something like that. Yeah. Those things are all incredibly important, and I think, you know, being dialed into every one of those aspects is really important.
Interesting. Okay, so before we start talking about different artist stages in the career and how to kind of build a strategy for each one, Mark here has asked a question. So he's asking, thank you, Mark, by the way, for the question. You mentioned earlier that we should have at least 4 weeks advance planning before releasing music. Would it help from a PR/marketing to have 90 days? And can you touch on a few suggestions launching a new artist? How to do this most effectively? Urban pop genre. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking if it's like more about playlist pitching, then we'll get to that later. But if you have a different angle for this, then go ahead.
I think it can potentially wait. I was just say, I think I do know Mark. I think it's Mark Sampson. Thank you for joining and dialing in.
Mark Sampson, thank you.
Yeah, really excited to, you know, dive into this. I think, you know, I'm not sure what's on the agenda, but if we're gonna, you know, jump into PR, I can kind of, you know, use Mark's question as like a case study for, you know, answering, you know, I guess getting started with PR and strategies.
So I guess we can connect that to our next questions, and Mark will answer you eventually, maybe during this section. How about let's start with if there are different strategies for PR based on where the artist is in her life cycle. Would an artist approach be different if they would just release their first EP, and would it be different if they have, I don't know, 10,000 monthly listeners?
Yeah, and just to make sure, I think you're asking, like, you know, if you're an artist at one particular stage versus another stage, are there different strategies or approaches or methodology, I guess?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think, I mean, I'm going to speak on PR first and foremost, and just kind of to touch on Mark's question. Yeah, in terms of distributing music, you know, the 4 weeks in advance at the minimum is kind of to prevent any issues with the metadata or content delivery, and make sure your music isn't delivered to the wrong artist profile or something like that. But in terms of lead time for PR marketing, you know, you always definitely want to give it as much lead time as possible. If we're talking like an album, you want to start, you know, promoting like ideally 3 to 6 months out, just because, you know, it's a bigger project and there's so much more you can do with an album versus a single. That being said, I think, you know, 60 to 90 days is definitely a very ideal timeline when you're, you know, kind of going about, I guess, you know, preparing all the different things right before, you know, the launch of a new single, right? And the reason I say that, at least from the PR perspective, you know, most journalists or editors or writers on different publications, you know, they're going to tend to want to have as much lead time as possible. And I would say 4 to 6 weeks is pretty good for a single. And if we're talking about a whole album, maybe like, you know, anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason is because when you're a writer, when you're an editor, and you're writing about not just one artist, but maybe tens and hundreds of artists over, excuse me, excuse me, over the course of like 1 to 2 months, you know, your bandwidth is going to be pretty limited. You're going to have a lot of different artists to write about, and you know, with everybody reaching out so far in ahead, so far in advance, you're kind of competing with all the other different artists that are trying to get exposure, trying to get their voice heard as well. So you want to get ahead, because if you're, here's a scenario. If you're pitching to someone at, say, Billboard or something 1 week before your release date, and you know, and you're trying to get a premiere or something like that, chances are the response is going to be, "Hey, love the single," or whatever, and you know, as much as I love it, I just don't have the bandwidth because I have X, Y, and Z all scheduled to be posted this coming week. I just don't have the bandwidth. I don't have enough time. You know.
So meaning even if you made it through the door of Billboard, and it's a week before, then it's not enough.
Yeah, and you know, it's unfortunate because you know there's so much to do as an independent artist. Even if you're a manager, there's just so much to handle and manage. But you know, that being said, you just really have to be, you know, get ahead of everything. And you know, I would one thing I will say is with the bigger publications like the, you know, the Billboards of the world, the Fader, Pigeons and Planes, Consequence of Sound, and whatnot, you know, they will have a higher, you know, they will have expectations for you to reach out much earlier. Whereas, you know, the more mid-tier or indie publications, you know, the more indie blogs that are covering a lot of, you know, independent artists that are just starting out or emerging artists, they're not gonna be as they're gonna be a lot more lenient. You know, if you're reaching out anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, that's not bad at all. I would say that you still have a really good chance, and I wouldn't say that you should not reach out just because you're 2 to 3 weeks out. One other thing I'll say about timeline is if you're reaching out way far in advance, let's say you're reaching out like 4 to 6 months in advance, that could also work, you know, against you, because let's say I listen to your album and it's you know, I love it, but it's coming out 6 months from now. I would tell you to reach back out to me later, and perhaps I'll forget, or you know, or maybe even then, like I am no longer writing at the publication, and you know, people have pretty short-term memory, or just, you know, low attention spans really, and you know, it's very possible that someone loves your music, but you reached out so far in advance that by the time it gets released, it's you know, it's just not in their mind anymore. But that being said, that of course, building when you're reaching out for PR, it shouldn't be transactional. It shouldn't be, hey, I want pitches to you. Can you get it up? Thanks, done. It should be, hey, I've been reading your, you know, your articles. I see that you're a fan of X, Y, and Z. I think you would really like the music that, you know, my client is working on, or, you know, I think you would really like my music as, you know, an indie pop musician who's making music that's similar to Lana Del Rey, Florence and the Machine, etc. Would you want to give my music a listen? And you're really developing that relationship. You're not, again, it shouldn't be transactional, because every transaction that you have in the music industry should be built on a relationship. And, you know, while the music industry is big and there's so many musicians and music industry professionals, it's also small. Everybody knows each other, and you know, you want to continue building that relationship, because let's say someone is writing at like an indie blog today, you know, maybe next month they're writing for, you know, like again, like Billboard or something, because they sought out a new opportunity and they've been a fan of yours, and you already had the relationship when you know, they had featured you or premiered your single or EP or album on, you know, the previous blog, and then they're at Billboard and they're like, hey, I know we've been friends for, you know, the last year and a half, and I've always loved your music. How would it sound if I premiered your next single? You know, so things like that happen. It has happened to me personally as well, and wow. You know, that's why I make sure that, you know, you obviously don't ever want to burn any bridges, and you want to continue honing your relationships and really building your rapport with everyone.
For sure. Also, like you said before, just to touch on the point where, like, who's the person who communicates with the publication? Does it have to be a PR agency, or do they actually open emails from artists? Because I'm sure they get like so many emails from artists.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a one-stop shop solution for anything, right? I mean, obviously, you know, when you're working with a publicist or a PR specialist or agency, the benefit is you're paying them or working with them for their connections for the most part, right? Like, hopefully the person you're working with is actually a fan of your music, and they're going to fight for you, right? You're hiring them not to just send an email. You're hiring them to obviously do the work, really help build and craft your narrative, and fight for you. Just because they get 5 no's doesn't mean they'll get more no's. Like, just they will go out there and pitch other publications or other writers that might actually like your music more than other writers. And I don't think it necessarily has to be a publicist or your manager or an agent reaching out. I definitely know of many artists, friends of mine, that have reached out themselves, and they're all DIY, do everything themselves, and they took the time to do the proper research, make sure that the writers and editors they're reaching out to are the right people first and foremost. If, again, just like with playlists, if you're reaching out to an editor or a writer who mostly writes about hip hop, but you're an all rock band, there's no chance they're going to cover you because they're just not the right person. So you wasted your time. So doing research is really important, rather than just finding someone's email and just shooting them email and saying, hey, I have this song releasing soon. Can you please feature it? Thanks. If you think about it, they don't necessarily owe you anything. They don't owe you a favor. They can literally just not respond. And, it could be that you didn't do your due diligence or whatnot, but doing your research, again, is really important. And I recall earlier you asked me a different question that I didn't address, which was, if you're at a different stage, let's say you're just starting out your first single, or if you're at 10,000 monthly listeners or 100,000 monthly listeners or a million listeners and whatnot, what I would have to say about that in regards to PR is, if you're just first starting out, I would personally say, even though I do PR for artists, I would personally say PR is not always the most important thing when first starting out. I don't think it's something you should neglect, and I definitely think it's something you should still do for sure. But I don't necessarily think you need to go and pay like $2,000, $3,000 to like the biggest PR company, to help you get on publications. Because chances are, unless you're on like a major label that's throwing a lot of money at your release, and the expectations of getting on like Billboard or like Consequence of Sound or the biggest publications in the world with your first release as an emerging artist, it's just not likely. And I think, of course, everybody's going to want to be on the biggest publications and have the biggest reach, but you also need to be a bit realistic with your expectations of where you're able to get featured, just based on and it sucks that when you're pitching music, journalists are looking at your numbers of like your social media numbers, how many followers you have, how many monthly listeners you have on Spotify. But I guess if I had to be real, if you think about it, all these publications like Billboard, they are a business. They're gonna monetize and feature artists based on how much traffic they can drive to their own site through your audience. So if you're trying to get on Billboard and you have maybe like 500 followers on Instagram and like 5,000 monthly listeners, it happens because of connections, but it's just not that likely.
Interesting. I have a few questions myself, but I think I'm going to let Jesus. We have here Jesus and Eric Red ask a few questions. Thank you guys for your questions. So Jesus is asking, how are you seeing artists pivot their PR strategies in the midst of current pandemic?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think I actually know who this is as well. This is Jesus, Jesus Cifuentes. He's the founder of Culture Pushers. He's a music journalist.
Oh, amazing, Jesus.
Yeah, works with really hip hop artists. You should definitely check out Culture Pushers when you get a chance. But to kind of answer,
I thought it was a nickname. Wow, I'm sorry about that.
This is real. Jesus. But to answer your question, about how are artists now pivoting their PR strategies in the midst of the current pandemic, it's a really interesting question. I think, unfortunately, there are definitely a lot of publications that are now no longer, I guess, running or alive, for lack of a better term, and a lot of that just has to do with budget. And not being able to manage having bandwidth or having, you know, volunteer writers and 1 hour freelance writers contribute, you know, on a regular basis. And that being said, there are a lot less publications to pitch to now, especially on the indie side, and even on the, you know, the bigger publication side. And it's unfortunate because, you know, it's really a powerful tool and tactic for building your story. But that being said, I think, you know, right now the music industry is really seeing an uptick in live stream, right? Everybody is doing live streams now, and not just over Zoom, but also Twitch. You know, like Twitch now has partnerships with SoundCloud, bands in town, whatnot. And I think to not even only to go into PR, I think it's important to just be aware of all the different trends happening, right? Even beyond PR, just being ahead of the curve and knowing what's about to blow up, you know, from a technology standpoint or platform standpoint is really important. I mean, everybody now, when you say the word TikTok, everybody's gonna know what that is, right? And it's no secret that TikTok is the biggest platform ever on the planet, not just in music, not just in social media, but on the planet. I mean, I think there's over 2 billion people who have downloaded it since, you know, the whole COVID-19 situation. I think the app had seen over 700,000 downloads in just like a month. Everybody's on TikTok, everybody's consuming, you know, content right now, you know, whereas obviously there are people who are watching live videos on Netflix, on Hulu and whatnot. At the same time, you know, everybody's watching short videos on TikTok and figuring out how to be creative. And, you know, you want to go to where the audience is. Let's say for example, MySpace maybe a decade ago was really popular for music, especially, and just as a social media platform. Nowadays, if you ask, you know, some of the younger crowds, they might not even know what MySpace is. And so that being said, the younger audiences and younger generations are kind of the generations of the future. And if you can tap into what everybody else is dialed into, you're really getting ahead of the curve. And so that being said, there are a lot of different strategies for TikTok. Maybe, you know, that's something we can say for another discussion or webinar later on.
Yeah.
But, you know, being on TikTok is really important, and figuring out how people are using music, what types of music people are using is going to be really important. And so that being said, also, you know, finding different opportunities to do live streams, whether it's with a brand or, you know, doing IG Live with your own audience on Instagram is really important. But in terms of PR, I would say nothing has really changed too much, but it's really having a good understanding of what types of topics different press are covering now. And, you know, personally, I don't believe in this philosophy, but a lot of artists are now making music that revolves around the whole coronavirus, you know, situation. Like, obviously, you know, last week, you know, 2 of the biggest artists in the world, Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande, teamed up and they released a song called Stuck With You. It's definitely, you know, a romantic love song about being stuck with your significant other in, you know, in these weird times. And you're gonna see that a lot of publications have covered it and talked about how it's the perfect song for quarantine, or, you know, how there are a lot of different playlists, you know, about the quarantine situation that are featuring, you know, songs like that. So I don't recommend going to make a song that is relevant just because of this current situation. I think you should stick to your personal, you know, artistic expressions and vision. But, you know, there's no lie that if you're making a song that's really relevant to the current situation, it's gonna have a lot of traction because people are just thinking a lot about quarantine, just stuck at home. So yeah.
Yeah, and also they're Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande, so they can do whatever they want, right?
That's who.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Andrew's video went down and it popped up again. Great. Yeah. Sometimes it happens because of connectivity problems, but we heard you perfectly. Yeah. So thank you, Jesus, for that question. Very interesting point. Next question by Eric Red. As a PR manager, would you choose to go after many low-hanging fruits, meaning blogs and playlists with less traction and traffic, or after a couple of big outlets? Any recommendations for independent artists to research the media outlets that they pitch to?
Eric, thank you for your question. That's a really, really, really good question, and you know, that's something I struggled with for a while. just for some background, I first started, managing artists about 3.5 years ago, and every artist manager has their own specialty. Mine was obviously PR, which is why now I offer it for other non-management clients and other independent artists to really help build their story and get exposure. That being said, I mentioned earlier that going after the biggest publications when just first starting out is not necessarily a good idea. I don't want to, discourage anybody from going after them, because it definitely happens, and a lot of it could be chance. A lot of it is being smart with, who you're pitching and, how you're going about pitching them, right? I mean, I definitely have gotten, a premiere from DMing somebody on Instagram because I saw that they do a lot of premieres, and, say like a specific writer doesn't have a big following on Instagram, chances are they might not be getting a lot of DMs. And, you want to be smart with how you're pitching. If you're pitching someone that writes that billboard or Consequence of Sound via email, chances are they're getting like hundreds of emails a week. And, that's when you have to be smart with, how you're pitching from the subject, not from just the email body, but the subject line, right? If every email that they see in their inbox is, artist X is releasing this, which is an indie pop track, blah, blah, on blah, 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 or like, this alt rock band is releasing blah, blah, blah. They're all going to look the same and they're not going to stand out. So how do you really get someone to read your email? And, a lot of that has to do with crafting a really creative email. I remember for one of my clients, one time I used a pretty obscure subject line, and it was something like, if Arctic Monkeys and Kings of Leon had babies, and something like that. Something just really weird that just really caught your attention. It's like, oh, that's different. I want to read that, right? That particular campaign, when I got a little creative, it really got a lot of replies, and that's definitely one way of standing out. But again, I don't discourage you from going after big publications, and even to that point of your initial part of the question, whether you should go after many low-hanging fruits, meaning going after a lot of blogs and higher volume of blogs and playlists with less traction and traffic. I would say blogs and playlists are a bit different in terms of how you should be pitching. With blogs, I definitely think, there are a lot of tools out there that could be helpful. It's a bit controversial in terms of how effective it is, but, there's Submit Hub, which is definitely, a platform that has now over like 1,300 different influencers, not just for blogs, but also playlists. Again, there's a lot of controversy around that and whether it's effective, because the approval rate, is really low. And you just have to understand that, just as with pitching on email, they're getting a lot of submissions. And, if you're a normal person that's not doing that full time, if you're listening to like 50 songs a day, if your song doesn't stand out to them, they're just going to flat out deny and decline it, right? So for Submit Hub specifically, I would say using premium credits actually helps a lot, because it gives some financial incentive for them to really listen and give feedback, and potentially even improve your submission. There's another platform that's really similar to Submit Hub called Groover. I think it's groover.co. It's just like Submit Hub, but it's more geared around European publications and influencers. But that being said, yeah, I don't think it's bad to go after as many publications as you can, as long as they're relevant. It just really goes back to pitching the relevant, publications. Again, if you're, I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but you need to make sure that the people you're pitching are the right people to pitch, and that they're actually going to be receptive to your music. And as another point, I think especially as a PR manager, something to be really dialed into is Hype Machine. For anybody that out there that isn't familiar with Hype Machine, it's kind of a lot of people like to describe it as like the indie charts for independent artists. You can find the website at hypem.com, hypem.com. If you go on there, you'll see that they have hundreds of blogs that are considered index sites. And what that really means is, they have a network of publications and blogs where if you're featured on there, you'll get indexed on Hype Machine, and you can potentially climb the charts on the Hype Machine charts.
Who's over there on Hype Machine? Why is it so?
Yeah, it's powerful because it helps build exposure. Outside of just getting exposure on different publications that have some clout and have some exposure and built-in audiences. There have definitely been discussions of even Spotify editors and editorial teams going on Hype Machine, looking at which artists are getting a lot of press features and coverage, and seeing, hey, this person got featured on like 9 different blogs that are part of Hype Machine. This must mean that a lot of people are listening to their music and they're getting a lot of traction. Maybe I'll listen to a song. And there have definitely been a lot of stories where a Spotify editor, discovers a song on Hype Machine. It's like, hey, this is really good. I'm gonna put it on my playlist on Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music or whatever.
Interesting.
But Hype Machine is definitely a really powerful one to really build exposure fast as an indie artist from a PR perspective.
Cool. So I think we're gonna jump forward a little bit. We talked about artist practical uses of maybe. You know what? I think this can be like really. We should give focus to this section. Like practical tactics that you would recommend for artists if you have such a PR playbook for a DIY artist. To like do A, B, C, D, and start working his plan ahead on his own. What would these tactics be, and how would you go about doing them?
Yep. Yeah. That's a good question. I think
we can narrow it to like 3, 4, 5 practical stuff that maybe people here who joined us can take home with them afterwards and like actually do on their own. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Even one thing for sure is definitely using tools out there that streamlines the process, such as Submit Hub. Again, there's a lot of controversy as to whether it's effective and whatnot, but I have definitely found success myself on Submit Hub from being very specific and targeted with the publication pitching. Another, I think for me personally, one of the most powerful strategies and effective strategies that has worked time and time again is, and it kind of ties everything all together from what we discussed today during this webinar is, first, again, identifying who you are as an artist. Number 2, doing the market research, or I guess we will call it competitor research of, knowing other artists who are similar to you or, have similar soundscape or genre, etc. 3, from there, looking at what publications these artists are featured on. So let's say you make indie pop music that's very similar to the 975. Maybe they're not a good example because they're super mainstream, but let's say there was an indie artist that was similar to the 975. I imagine an artist called the Millennial Club. Say they, I make music similar to that, and I want to see where they've been featured. That's a really powerful strategy, because if I make music like this other artist, and I want to market my music similarly to this artist, or get my music featured on publications where this artist was featured on, it's a smart strategy, because you can, there's pretty much a big guarantee that, if your music is similar and your branding is similar and then your audiences are similar. So let's say, for example, again, you make music like the 975. You research on Google 975 and you look at all the different blogs and publications where they've been featured, and going through those different articles and looking at which writer actually wrote up that feature. That's a really powerful strategy, because you can for sure guarantee that they're going to like your music since you have similar audiences. And that being said, from there's a bit of legwork and grunt work with finding contacts. I think in terms of music journalism, a lot of writers are actually very active on Twitter. There's obviously Instagram and whatnot, but Twitter is definitely like a really powerful platform for writers in general, just because I think when you're a writer, you're writing maybe anywhere between 4 to 5 articles a week, and you want to share them constantly. And Instagram isn't really built for that, because you have to post a photo and then you can't, link out to your URL or whatever. But on Twitter, you can literally like post like 8 times a day, and it's totally fine. So because of that, you know, a lot of writers are on there, and you can, for example, let's say you go on like Pigeons and Planes or something, and you go on their Twitter page, you might see that they retweeted a lot of articles, and you can see, you know, the actual Twitter handles and usernames of the writer who, you know, who shared the article that they wrote today.
Interesting.
Twitter, sometimes they have their emails on there. Sometimes they have, you know, other different contact methods, and that's a really, really strong way of doing market research and saving yourself a lot of time, a lot of guesswork. Yeah, I would say that's
down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. And LinkedIn is definitely another really good one. You know, I would say LinkedIn writers tend to be pretty saturated with requests and connection requests and whatnot. But, you know, I've connected with quite a few writers through LinkedIn, and I've developed that relationship with them. You know, again, you don't want to like pitch them right away on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatnot and say like, hey, I have this song coming out, can you feature it? It should be like, hey, I'm a fan of your work. I've been reading your work for a while, and I can see that you're a fan of, you know, X, Y, and Z. I would love to talk to you about, you know, blah, blah, and I want to see if you're open to music submissions. Because when you're, you know, more or less asking for permission to pitch the artist or pitch the journalist, you know, then it's like, okay, they said I could pitch them, then it's okay, rather than just, you know, barging in and trying to pitch them with everything. Just think about, you know, if you're like at home and someone rings your doorbell and knocks on your door and tries to sell you like a $5,000 vacuum, you're like, no, go away. I don't want anything to do with this. But
does that still happen?
No, not at all. But I'm just trying to give an example. Thankfully,
it's a good example.
Yeah. So yeah, asking permission, but also being smart and, you know, limiting guesswork and, you know, finding people on effective platforms is going to be really important.
Very interesting. It's kind of similar to what you would do if you would go gigging or touring now. Check which artists have performed there, where your artists have performed as well. Kind of like same method, overlapping also to gigging. Is there a way where, like, if I'm now an artist that's doing a tour, like a summer tour, let's say it's 2021 and venues started opening, and would your PR approach be different? And if so, then in what way? Like, what's the difference between PR strategy and a tour PR strategy?
Yeah, I think it's very different for sure. I mean, whenever you're doing tour marketing or doing PR for you know, touring, you know, you have very different objectives from, you know, when you're releasing music. If you're releasing music, you know, obviously you want to target audiences that are going to be a good fit for your music. And, you know, to that point, you can have nowadays, you know, you could be based in America and have a lot of fans in the US, but, you know, now we're seeing, you know, fans from not just the US, but also Asia, Europe, Australia, etc. And there are a lot of audiences out there that are untapped. But when it comes to touring, you want to be very, 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 very hyper targeted with who you're kind of getting, you know, getting features from. If you're doing like a West Coast tour on the US, you know, say California, Washington, Portland, and whatnot, and then you go after, you know, publications that, you know, do a lot of show reviews or live music reviews in, say, Boston or New York, it's not going to make sense because you're not touring there. So you need to have a better, like a good understanding of local publications, whether it's local newspapers or, you know, smaller blogs or publications where, you know, you're invited. I would say a smart strategy is finding those local publications, finding out the ones that, you know, they actually go to a show and do reviews, and maybe even offering them a free ticket, complimentary ticket, or, you know, if they do a lot of photography, you can invite them to come take photos for you for free. You know, hey, want to invite you to our show. We're playing, you know, 4 weeks from today at this venue. I saw that you could take really good photos or you do really good show reviews. I thought you might be a fan of our music since you've you know, covered these artists. How would you like a complimentary ticket? And you can, you know, I'll give you a photo pass or whatever. And yeah, and that's a really good way of not only just getting exposure, but getting additional people out to your show and having a bigger head count.
Interesting. Cool. Okay, so we have I'd say around 15 minutes left of time. Guys, if you have questions, feel free. It's on the bottom, ask a question. You can do that. I think we're going to jump into the most, maybe, I don't know if most interesting, but most trendy topic, Spotify playlists.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit from your experience about maybe tactics to reach out to Spotify playlists, how to do that, and how to find the right playlists, and also about algorithmic playlists. If you have any knowledge on that, how would we musicians help boost ourselves through algorithmic Spotify playlists? Is there a magic formula to that?
Yeah, I think right before I jump into Spotify playlists, I will, give the disclaimer that, while PR is important, I personally still think PR is most important for building your narrative and your story as an artist. And if you're looking to do PR to get more streams on Spotify or Apple Music, it's not going to happen. And the fact of the matter is today that, maybe 10, 20 years ago, people were relying on blogs to discover music and listen to music that way. But, we're in a very different, time now where you can get on Billboard and the Fader and Pigeons and Planes and whatnot, but you're not seeing any uptick in streaming activity from that. And that's just, matter of fact, just because people are not necessarily, being driven to the streaming platforms from, press features anymore. So that's one thing that I always try to tell artists or PR managers or, managers and whatnot. Again, getting on big publication does not mean you're going to get more streams. It's about getting clout and building your online presence and having, a strong presence, when people are searching for you on Google. That being said, Spotify playlists, I've always found to be the champion and kind of, the leader in reviving the music industry, because the platform really is built out, to make sharing playlists and sharing music very easy. Obviously there's Apple Music, there's YouTube and all these other platforms, but Spotify's, app and platform ecosystem is really built for playlists. And, you can go on there and find so many different playlists. There are millions and millions. There are probably more playlists than music there, than there are on Spotify. And to that point, I found that to be one of the strongest, not just tools, but partners of mine for helping artists get exposure, right? You can look and it's so easy for someone to look at an artist's Spotify profile and say, oh, they have like 500 monthly listeners, and that's unfair to say like, oh, they're not big or whatever. And it's just unfair. But at the same time, Spotify has really changed the game because it allows you to reach out to like 10 playlists and maybe they have decent followings, and just like that, you're reaching an audience that you would have never before. Let's say a playlist has 1,000 followers and maybe, it has like, 500 listeners on average in a month. Just from reaching out, you're potentially tapping into a big audience of 1,000 people who could listen to your music. Now that being said, in terms of outreach, I almost look at, what they call Spotify playlisting nowadays as the same as doing PR, right? It's, again, understanding your brand and your genre and, how you're identifying yourself. Then again, finding different artists that are similar to yourself and seeing what playlists they're on. I think a really, really powerful strategy that people overlook is, going on an artist's profile and looking at their about section. This strategy I'm about to explain might not work as well for like big artists who have like thousands or like, millions of monthly listeners. But if you are able to identify other indie artists that are, similar to you in numbers, let's say you have like 10,000 monthly listeners and you're looking at artists with like 50,000 to like 100,000 monthly listeners, maybe they're not on a lot of editorial playlists so far. But so that being said, if you're on Spotify and you go to an artist's profile, click on the about section, you can see the top 5 playlists that they're on. And if they're not big enough to a point where they're on just a lot of editorial playlists, you'll see a lot of independent playlists that they're on. You know, say like, you know, the top 5 playlists, the first 2 are Spotify, and then the bottom 3, maybe the third playlist has like 40,000 followers. And you know, you can see, if you click on it, you might be able to see in the playlist description that there's a contact method for that playlist, or you know, a lot of times there are people who, you know, use different tools like Chartmetric, but there's also, you know, other tools like Spot on Track. Chartmetric isn't exactly an affordable tool. I think it's like $130 a month, but there is a really good platform called Spot on Track. I'll type it in the chat right now. It's you know, SPOTONTRACK. They have a much more affordable subscription. I think you pay like $5 or $10 a month. And from doing that, you can go on there, you can search different artists. So going back to the example of, say, like the 975, if you make music like that, you go on Spot on Track, you can search the artist, the 975, you can see every single playlist that every single one of their songs has been featured on, whether it's currently or in the past. And by doing that, you know, you can actually view every single playlist, go through them, see if, you know, if it's a playlist that has contact information, and you can reach out to them. And from there, it's just like pitching for PR. You know, again, Spotify playlisting is not too different from doing PR, but you do want to be very careful because, you know, Spotify has gotten to a point where there are a lot of playlisters who, you know, one, some of them might charge you, and, you know, if the chances are, if they're charging you, there's a chance that they're charging everybody, and, you know, you have to kind of at some point weigh how many times do I have to pay to be on a playlist and whether it's worth it. If you're pitching to playlist curators who are not looking for money and purely are fans, you can trust that, you know, they're doing it purely for the passion of music and wanting to share music. That being said, there are also a lot of playlists that have inflated follower numbers. So maybe a playlist has like 400,000 followers, but maybe it only has like 40 listeners. And that happens a lot because, you know, people
engagement.
Yeah, so looking at engagement for playlists is important. A lot of people, you know, buy follows on playlists and, you know, beef it up to make it look like they have a lot of, you know, engagement, and they charge you to be on a playlist. And, you know, that's literally a scam, and they're just trying to scam you.
By the way, I found that you don't have to have a paid account, that you can check the playlist engagement rate. And so this is also something that really helped me when I'm doing my research, to go to Chartmetric and open the playlist, and then you can see engagement rate. So, you know, if they have like 20,000 followers, so-called, but then they have like, I don't know, like less than 1% or 0% engagement rate. And they also have estimated listeners, I think. I'm not sure if that's for free or paid, and estimated monthly listeners. So yeah, that's I think the strongest point of PR, of Spotify playlist research, is to really like nailing that engagement rate and only then approaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to that point, that part gets a little tricky just because unless you have a huge audience, you might not be able to see the average listeners. Like, let's say you have like 500 followers on a playlist, you know, it's probably not going to show how many listeners it has, just because there's not enough activity for you to be able to view it. Now, that being said, you know, I actually read an article recently about how, you know, I wouldn't say big playlists are out and small playlists are in, but, you know, when I'm working on Spotify playlist campaigns for artists, obviously I try to go after big playlists, or big playlists as in playlists with a lot of following, but also small playlists. And that kind of, you know, taps into what you're talking about with algorithmic playlists. You know, most people that use Spotify, they love it for the algorithmic recommendations, say like Discover Weekly and Release Radar. And the way that Discover Weekly happens is, first of all, it's gonna serve you music based on your listener taste, right? So if you're listening to a lot of like alt rock, indie rock, etc., you know, you can expect that next week the music that you're being served on Discover Weekly is gonna be alt rock, indie rock. And that being said, you know, from an artist perspective, you first of all, just algorithmic playlists tend to make up most of your streams as an artist as you go on, even more so than editorial playlists. and your algorithmic presence will definitely increase with more playlists that you're on. And it kind of goes back to being on relevant playlists. And it's because of what, as you were saying about, engagement, right? If you're on a playlist where people are listening through it and then they get to your track and, they listen to 10 seconds of it, it's like, this is not what I thought this playlist would be, skip. Spotify is able to see, skip rates of songs. They're able to see how long you're listening to a song, whether you're listening to a song for 10 seconds or the full song or only 2 minutes, they can see all of that. And
so can wrong playlist, sorry, go on.
No, yeah, I think you were going to ask, can being on a wrong playlist be bad? Yes, absolutely.
Exactly.
It, being on maybe not even just wrong or just like, I guess wrong, yeah, like playlists that are not relevant to you, it's going to have a negative effect on your algorithm. And it's going to actually cause your Discover Weekly to activate much slower than it should. And again, that just has to do with, having low engagement on playlists and whatnot. Because the lower your engagement, the more that you're telling Spotify, a lot of people don't like my music. A lot of people don't want to listen to music. So don't put my music on more Discover Weekly playlists because people are not going to engage with it. And again, just as with publications, you have to think about how at the end of the day, Spotify is a business. They want to encourage as many people to listen to music as possible. So if a lot of people are not engaging with your music or skipping it, and you're on playlists that are not relevant to you, it's not going to do them any favor. They're not going to make money off it, So again, if there's not one bigger takeaway, market and target your audiences in a smart and effective way. Don't be lazy and try to get on publications or playlists that are not relevant to you, because it's going to do you injustice in not just time and effort, but also it can have a negative effect on your algorithms.
Very interesting. Okay, guys, just reminding everyone that you can ask questions below. We are going to have a few more minutes left for this webinar. So any questions you have, now's the time to ask them. In the meantime, wow, so many more questions, Andrew. I can carry on talking to you forever, I think.
Same, likewise.
So in terms of budgeting, like I know are kind of preparing their, and like they have these studio sessions and recordings and mastering and mixing, and then like the graphic design, and then it becomes like a lot more expensive than what you would think of, what you imagined in the beginning. And then there's all the marketing aspect of stuff. So I'm curious how, like, to kind of, when is the right time to properly define your budget, and how would you go about like separating between the creative and marketing process, and how much would you allocate, maybe more about the marketing side you can discuss, to kind of give, I don't know, artists like a long-term understanding of how they should plan their budget and how they should be thinking about it.
Yeah, excuse me. When it comes to budgeting, again, just as I mentioned earlier, I think, PR is powerful, but maybe not the most necessary at the very beginning stages of your career as an artist, right? I think, your money is probably much better spent on, digital marketing, where you're, trying to gain more Instagram followers or gaining more Spotify followers and things like that, because that's directly building your audience, as opposed to PR, because PR is more so for building your story and narrative and kind of gaining clout and having a stronger online presence. So right off the bat, if you're releasing your first single and you're strapped on budget, probably want to invest more of that in digital marketing, or, try to get, more people to stream your music through Instagram story ads and whatnot. Or, working with, like a Spotify playlist service where they can help you get more, add some more playlists that generates stronger algorithmic activity, and that, helps you gain more exposure, and, more people are listening to your music to begin with, just because, a primary goal as an artist, one of your goals always is to continue building your fan base, because if you don't have a fan base, you can't monetize your music. You can't monetize your music, you can't make money, you can't make money, you can't make more music. It's a whole cycle. That being said, I think I think it's a somewhat tough question because everybody is, you know, comes from different, you know, walks of life, have different situations, different financial situations, and, you know, maybe to one person, you know, dropping $1,000 is nothing, whereas to someone else, $250 is kind of, you know, the top limit because you're so strapped on, you know, on cash, right? And you know, as a human, obviously you should do what's best for yourself, you know, and you want to make sure that you can feed yourself, you're safe and all that. But if I had to, you know, give a suggestion, I would say don't start blowing like thousands of dollars like right away off the bat, because you wanna be smart with how you're spending your money. You want to test different methods and seeing what works. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, as an artist, there's so much you can do, and you can throw a million things at the wall and only 3 things stick. So it's about finding those things that stick. So if you're kind of, you know, slowly testing a little bit of digital marketing here, slowly testing working with the Spotify playlist service and whatnot, and, you know, maybe slowly testing a Submit Hub, submitting to playlists and whatnot, you know, eventually you have an idea, okay, this thing works, this thing doesn't. I should probably stop spending so much on this thing that doesn't work, spending more on this thing. You know, I would say if you had to be like super low budget, Submit Hub could be a very good start for, you know, buying maybe like anywhere between 10 to 30 credits, submitting some premium submissions to playlists and seeing how that goes. And if it's working for you, great. If it's not, you know, try looking into other methods, other tools that might work for you. Or, you know, at the same time, maybe you don't even need to spend any money. If you're, you know, very DIY and you're being, you know, again, being very smart with how you're finding different playlists or different publications of where, you know, you can pitch people and they're not asking you for money, you don't have to spend a single dime, you know? So it's just time, really. And that's why, especially since we're also strapped on time, even though we're all quarantined, you know, you can only do so much in a day as a human being. And being smart is going to be really, really cost effective and time efficient.
So just to connect this with maybe the beginning of the conversation, it's all wrapped around your research, obviously, and your artist brand. So for whoever, if there were people that weren't here at the beginning, we talked about having your artist brand, defining it, kind of seeing similar artists, how they present themselves on social media and so on. And then from there, like from that core, to start with different tactics and be very methodological. Have a method. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a method about each one and know what you're measuring exactly. So if you're talking about like Spotify playlists or Submit Hub or doing your digital marketing, which I feel like all these 3 can also be done kind of on your own, professional way, but give it like a few days. So I'm trying like to give us to close the whole circle. And maybe you can help me out here with kind of prioritizing. I finished my EP. I'm ready for a release. It's in 2 months. How would you break down like what would be the priority channels you would use?
Yep, for sure. So obviously, you know, you have your finished product, you know, everything's mixed and mastered, you're good to go. You know, obviously first distribute it. You know, you want to distribute it as early as possible, because something I forgot to mention is, you know, Spotify now has a playlist submission tool where once you distribute music and it's, you know, scheduled on Spotify, on the back end on Spotify for artists, make sure you sign up for that. You know, you can actually, you know, give a pitch of the song. You can select the genres, all the instruments that you use, and you can write, I think it's 500 characters, like a little pitch that talks about the song. So some things that they recommend is, you know, whether it's gonna have like a premiere somewhere, or, you know, giving the backstory of a song, or, you know, what the significance or the meaning of the song is, and that will give Spotify a better understanding of your material. So that way, you're giving Spotify as much time as possible to potentially consider your music for being added to editorial playlists. But also, when you're submitting, you know, to the playlist tool, it's going to be added to the release radar playlist for all the followers on Spotify. And so from there, after you distribute it, after you submit for the playlist pitching, if you're gonna do PR, definitely, you know, you want to do your research of which publications would be a good fit. you can do that based on a lot of similar artists and seeing what publications they're on, and then at the same time seeing what playlists they're on, doing the legwork and finding, you know, all the different contact information for all these different playlist curators or, you know, writers, editors ahead of time, pitching them.
Open a spreadsheet, don't be lazy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Don't be lazy. You know, spend some time on it, but also be smart about it, be efficient, and find the contact information. Reach out early enough, anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time. You know, if they're not responding to you, do some follow-ups, give them some time. Don't follow up every other day. You know, you won't give them like 1 to 2 weeks in between, so you're not annoying them. And be smart with your pitch. Be smart with, you know, your subject line. Don't write the same thing as everybody else. Make your body message a little bit more unique. You know, talk about the inspiration behind your story rather than, hey, you know, I'm releasing the song, would love for you to feature it, thanks. You know, like, be a little more smart about it. Make it unique, make it special, you know, because when you're releasing music, it's special. It's a story, it's your narrative. You want to give the context of, you know, why you made the music, why it's important, and why they should want to feature your music. And even after that, you know, even after the song is released, a lot of people tend to think, okay, I did all the work I need to do. It's released now. Now I'm gonna let the universe take care of it. That's not how it works. You know, we're in a time and economy where streaming had made it infinitely more, you know, more beneficial for artists, where you can release a song and continue to market it forever, because streaming is forever. Someone can listen to your song a week from today, a month from today, a year from today, 10 years from now, and you can continue building your streams. Just because you didn't make 50,000 streams in the first week doesn't mean you won't hit 50,000 streams a month from now or the next month. You know, I would say one of my clients, you know, HOAX, they released their very first song in like November 2016. You know, for like a whole year, it didn't break like 100,000 streams. Then, I mean, look back now, like, it's almost at 2 million streams. It's all building on each other and being patient and fostering your music and looking at it from a long-term perspective rather than a short game. So yeah, I think, you know, to sum up all that, that's kind of the process for everything.
Wow. Okay. A lot to take in. Andrew, maybe like just we reach the end, tell us a little bit about what you do in Universal and like your day-to-day there and how it's different from your personal brand, from PR, romantic PR.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, currently I work at Universal Music Group. I am specifically a playlist and streaming optimization consultant there. So I work with a lot of different Universal Music accounts and artists to, you know, optimize not only their streaming strategy, but also look at, you know, the different playlists that they could be on. It's a little bit different because, you know, from the label perspective, I have, you know, access to, you know, obviously like, you know, the Universal system, and, you know, being a label, they have a lot more connections, and it's going to be very different from approaching, you know, the marketing strategy as an artist, because on a label, you're going to be connected with like Spotify and whatnot, and you're going to be able to pitch your music to them directly because you're a label. Whereas, you know, as an independent artist, you know, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on, and you probably have to approach things pretty differently from a more DIY grassroots approach. So it is pretty different because, you know, I have to kind of separate that, and, you know, I'm obviously not allowed to like access my contacts through Universal and whatnot. But it does show me a lot about, you know, how the label system works, and, you know, kind of the marketing tactics that they're using. And I would say it's not too different from everything we talked about here today. It's just, you know, they have bigger budgets and they can throw money at a lot of things, and we don't have the luxury to do that. But, you know, outside of that, you know, with artist management and, you know, running my own PR agency, Romantic PR, it's different just because, you know, a lot of what I had to do is, rather than blowing a lot of money, I had to be very smart with, you know, finding contacts and developing relationships, even outside of my job at Universal. And I will say a lot of my relationships that I built over the years have really, you know, really just benefited me and my artists and clients, because, you know, when you have someone that believes in you from the start, and you know, you reconnect with them years later, they're seeing that you're making progress, people are gonna like to see that you're making progress, and they're gonna want to follow you and follow your journey. So to that point, develop relationships. Don't burn any bridges, and make sure you're nice to everybody and kind and just a good human being.
Will there be big labels 20 years from now?
Good question. I mean, I want to say yes. I think it's a pretty complicated situation, but I think even today we've seen so many independent labels emerge, and whereas 20 years ago, maybe there was there were artists that were up here like Usher, Kiss, Van Halen, whatever, and then it was just like a nobody. You're either up here or you're either down here. Now you can be either up here or down here or in between. There's a gap. There's no discrepancy, and you can be an artist with like 10,000 monthly listeners or 500,000 or 10 million. So to that point, I think labels are still going to exist because they serve a purpose in helping build your narrative and your marketing strategy, and especially if you're on a label that really believes in you, they're going to go and fight for you and really fund your music and fund your passion. So to that point, I don't think labels will disappear. I think they'll only continue to evolve, with the streaming economy and where the music industry is going.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I think we have one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Sure. I'll just say thank you for everyone who joined us during this very interesting and in-depth webinar. We will be sending this out also via email afterwards. If you want to watch it again or just remind yourself about specific areas, you can feel free to do so. Also, you can follow us on our Facebook page on IndieFlow. We are IndieFlow, facebook.com/weareIndieFlow, where you will also be able to find this. And last question I think we have here is from Roy. Any advice about sync licensing?
Yeah, I mean, I think sync licensing is a whole separate topic that would require
separate webinar.
Yeah, but to be completely honest, I don't have as much experience with sync licensing. I think in terms of approach or methodology, it's going to be very similar to PR and pitching playlists and whatnot. But there are a lot of other intricacies around that, such as like getting music clearance or getting if you're an independent artist, it's going to be much easier to get sync license placements versus if you're on a label, because a label is going to own your music and you have to go through a lot of approvals and yada yada yada. Whereas if you're an independent artist, you can get cleared much more easily. And there are a lot of really, really good sync licensing companies out there that that are willing to work with you. I would say one really good one, a little bit more of a DIY approach that's similar to Submit Hub, is called Song Trader. I'm going to type the URL here. Song Trader. They're kind of like the Submit Hub of sync licensing. You can upload your music, place your different ownership and writer shares and whatnot, submit to different opportunities, and it's kind of like the waiting game or Submit Hub game where you're submitting, and if you get approved, then then you work out a deal. But we definitely should set up another time to talk about sync licensing in the future.
For sure. Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. It was really interesting and like I said, in depth. I hope everyone here took something from this hour and 23 minutes. And yeah, thank you again so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us. Anything you want to say also before we leave?
No, yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you all for having me. Elad and Omer. I'm trying to say your names like exactly accurately, but
we'll never correct you also, because we enjoy seeing you try to pronounce it right.
For sure. But Elad and Omer, the founders of IndieFlow, they're amazing. We connected some time ago, and they showed me IndieFlow, and IndieFlow really is a powerful platform, and it's really helpful with building your workflow. Whether you're a musician or a manager or publicist, whatever it is, it's really intuitive, and I highly recommend anybody that hasn't signed up for a demo to check it out. And see if it's a good fit for you. And I, definitely ask them about that. They're the experts. But thank you so much for having me, and hopefully we can make this a regular thing and do this more often.
For sure, we will. Thank you very much for the kind words, and thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be ending this broadcast. Be doing this on maybe a bi-weekly or maybe even weekly basis, so stay tuned for more webs and more interesting stuff. And everyone have a great end of the weekend.
Awesome. Thank you all.